The pre-dawn darkness wrapped around Phoenix like a shroud, broken only by scattered streetlights casting long shadows across empty streets. In the Martinez family's backyard, beneath the gnarled branches of an ancient mesquite tree, two figures moved with the careful precision of conspirators who believed themselves invisible to the world's judgment. Elias Martinez knelt beside his wife's cherry-red Honda Civic, his weathered hands working with practiced efficiency on the brake lines. The beam of his penlight illuminated the metal components as he made precise cuts with a utility knife, each slice deliberate and calculated. His face bore the expression of a man who had crossed a line from which there would be no return, yet showed no trace of remorse. Only the cold satisfaction of someone executing a plan he believed to be flawless. "Do you know what the sweetest thing about planning someone's death is?" Elias whispered to his companion, his voice carrying a twisted satisfaction as his tongue traced his lips in an unconscious gesture of anticipation. "That you can do it with the same mouth you used to say, 'I love you.'" Samara Delgado shifted nervously beside him, her white nurse's scrubs stark against the darkness. At 32, she possessed a beauty that drew attention in hospital corridors. Full lips that curved naturally into smiles that didn't reach her eyes, auburn hair that caught light like fire, and green eyes that held secrets she'd never shared with another soul. Her profession had taught her to heal, but somewhere in the maze of night shifts and thankless patients, she'd lost her way, finding herself drawn to the darkness that Elias offered like a moth to a flame. Her fingers trembled as she chewed her already raw nails, a habit that had intensified since she'd agreed to this madness. "What if something goes wrong?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the whisper of wind through the mesquite leaves. Elias paused in his work, turning to look at her with eyes that seemed to glow in the reflected light. "Nothing will go wrong. She'll lose her brakes on Devil's Curve. You know, that sharp turn on Highway 87, where the road drops into the canyon. She won't even know what's happening until it's too late." The certainty in his voice should have been reassuring, but instead it sent a chill down Samara's spine. She'd watched Elias manipulate situations and people with the same cold precision he now applied to sabotaging his wife's car. He was a man who believed the world owed him everything, who saw other people as obstacles to be removed rather than human beings deserving of compassion. "And what if she takes Leo?" Samara pressed, thinking of Yasmin's 8-year-old son with his gap-toothed smile and innocent questions about why his daddy worked so late. "She won't," Elias replied with the confidence of someone who'd studied his target's routines obsessively. "Every Tuesday and Thursday, she drops him off at school at exactly 7:30, then heads to her morning yoga class. It's like clockwork. She'll be alone on that road, just like always." As he spoke, Elias's hands continued their deadly work, severing the brake fluid line with surgical precision. He'd researched the process meticulously, watching YouTube videos on automotive repair and consulting with a mechanic friend under the pretense of wanting to learn more about car maintenance. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was using knowledge meant to preserve life to instead destroy it. Samara watched the dark fluid begin to drip onto the concrete beneath the car, each drop like a countdown to murder. "When she has the accident," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "our lives will really be set, won't they? We'll get her inheritance, the life insurance, everything." Elias set down his tools and turned to face her fully, his hands cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted the violence he was orchestrating. "When she has the accident, our lives will be all set. We'll get her entire fortune, and she'll be out of the picture permanently." The words hung in the night air with a finality that seemed to make even the crickets fall silent. He kissed her then, hard and demanding, as if the act of planning murder had ignited some primal fire within him. Samara closed her eyes and kissed him back, but it wasn't passion that drove her, it was fear. Fear of being alone again, fear of returning to her empty apartment and her empty life, fear that she'd already come too far to turn back now. What neither of them knew was that miles away, in the comfortable bedroom she shared with her husband, Yasmin Martinez was lying awake, staring at the ceiling and feeling an inexplicable sense of dread settling in her chest like a weight. She'd been married to Elias for 12 years, and while she'd long since stopped believing in the fairy tale of perfect love, she'd never imagined the depth of his betrayal. Yasmin had noticed the changes in her husband over the past months. The late nights he claimed to be working overtime, the new cologne that smelled like someone else's perfume, the way he looked at her sometimes as if she were already gone. But even in her darkest moments of suspicion, she couldn't have imagined this. As dawn began to creep across the horizon, Elias and Samara completed their deadly work and slipped away like shadows, leaving behind only the faint scent of brake fluid and the promise of tragedy. The car sat innocuously in the driveway, its exterior unchanged but its heart fatally compromised, waiting for an innocent victim to trust in its ability to stop. ## Chapter 2. The Morning of Reckoning. Tuesday morning arrived with the deceptive beauty of a perfect spring day in Phoenix. The sun painted the sky in shades of coral and gold, and the air carried the sweet scent of orange blossoms from the tree in the Martinez family's backyard. It was the kind of morning that seemed to promise nothing but good things ahead, making the darkness that lurked beneath all the more sinister. Yasmin Martinez moved through her morning routine with the practiced efficiency of a mother who'd perfected the art of getting her family ready for the day. At 34, she retained the natural beauty that had first caught Elias's eye in college. Dark hair that caught the morning light, warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, and a grace in her movements that spoke of dance lessons from childhood. She wore her favorite peach-colored blouse and the floral apron Leo had given her for Mother's Day, decorated with his handprints in bright primary colors. The kitchen filled with the comforting sounds and smells of breakfast. Coffee percolating, eggs sizzling in the pan, toast browning to perfection. The radio played softly in the background, the morning DJ's cheerful banter mixing with country songs that Yasmin hummed along to as she worked. It was a scene of domestic tranquility that could have been pulled from a magazine spread about the American dream. Mom. Leo's voice rang out from the backyard, filled with the excitement that only 8-year-olds could bring to the simple act of discovering something new. Grandma's here. Yasmin wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside to see Mrs. Ephigenia Martinez making her way slowly up the front walk. At 73, Elias's mother was a woman who bore the weight of her years with dignity, though her body showed the accumulated toll of decades spent raising 6 children and working double shifts at the local textile factory. Her gray hair was pulled back in the same neat bun she'd worn for 40 years, and her faithful gray shawl was wrapped around her shoulders despite the warming morning air. But it was the cough that concerned Yasmin most, a deep, rattling sound that seemed to come from the very depths of Mrs. Ephigenia's chest and left her gasping for breath between words. The older woman's skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and her hands, once strong enough to work 16-hour days without complaint, now trembled with fatigue. Mrs. Ephigenia, Yasmin said warmly, hurrying to help her mother-in-law up the front steps. What brings you out so early? And that cough sounds terrible. Have you seen Dr. Rodriguez about it? Mrs. Ephigenia waved away the concern with the stubborn independence that had carried her through 7 decades of hardship. Doctors want to run tests for everything these days, Mija. But I heard about a curandera, a healer, who's set up practice over in the San Mateo neighborhood. They say she has blessed hands, that she can cure things the doctors can't even name. As she spoke, another coughing fit seized her, leaving her doubled over and gasping. Yasmin rubbed her back gently, feeling the sharp angles of shoulder blades through the thin fabric of her dress. When the coughing finally subsided, Mrs. Ephigenia looked up with eyes that held both hope and desperation. I was wondering, Mija, if you might lend me your car for the day? I know it's an imposition, but the bus doesn't go out that far, and the taxi would cost more than I can afford. Yasmin felt something cold settle in her stomach, a premonition so strong it made her breath catch. For a moment, she could almost see disaster looming ahead, could almost hear the screech of brakes that wouldn't respond and the terrible silence that would follow. But looking at Mrs. Ephigenia's hopeful face, she couldn't bring herself to refuse. Of course, she said, forcing a smile. Let me just take Leo to school first, and then I'll come back and get it ready for you. Mrs. Ephigenia's face lit up with gratitude. Bless you, Mija. You've always been so good to me, so much better than I deserve. As Yasmin helped her mother-in-law into the house for a cup of coffee while they waited, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was setting something terrible in motion. But sometimes the most devastating betrayals come disguised as acts of kindness, and sometimes the people we're trying to protect become the very ones who pay the price for someone else's sins. Meanwhile, 20 miles away in his downtown office, Elias Martinez sat behind his desk trying to appear focused on the stack of insurance claims before him. But his attention kept drifting to his watch, calculating the time until his plan would unfold. He'd chosen this particular Tuesday because he knew Yasmin's routine so well. School drop-off at 7:30, yoga class at 9 o'clock, grocery shopping at 10:30. She'd be on Devil's Curve at approximately 9:15, just as the morning sun would be hitting the windshield at the perfect angle to create glare. What he hadn't calculated into his perfect plan was the variable of human kindness. The simple fact that his wife was the kind of person who would lend her car to an elderly woman in need, regardless of her own inconvenience. It was exactly that quality of selfless generosity that had first attracted him to Yasmin, and now it would become the instrument of his undoing. At 9:47 a.m., Elias's cell phone rang. The caller ID showed the hospital's number, and for a moment his heart raced with what he expected to be news of Yasmin's accident. But the voice on the other end wasn't reporting the death of his wife. It was reporting the death of his mother. "Mr. Martinez? This is Dr. Sarah Chun at Phoenix General Hospital. I'm afraid there's been an accident involving your mother, Mrs. Ephigenia Martinez. She was driving a red Honda Civic when she apparently lost control on Highway 87. The car went over the embankment at Devil's Curve." The words hit Elias like a physical blow. What? What do you mean? She doesn't drive. She doesn't even have a license anymore. According to the registration, the vehicle belongs to your wife, Yasmin Martinez. Mrs. Ephigenia was found with her purse, which contained a note saying she'd borrowed the car to visit a healer in San Mateo. "Mr. Martinez, I'm very sorry, but your mother didn't survive the impact." Elias dropped the phone, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him in the space of a heartbeat. The perfect plan, executed with surgical precision, had claimed the wrong victim. Instead of eliminating the obstacle to his happiness, he'd murdered the woman who'd given him life, who'd worked 3 jobs to put food on their table when he was growing up, who'd never stopped believing in his potential for good. The irony was devastating in its completeness. Mrs. Ephigenia Martinez, who'd spent her entire life caring for others, had died because of her son's desire to kill his wife. The woman who'd taught him his first prayers, who'd bandaged his scraped knees and kissed away his childhood fears, had become the victim of the monster he'd allowed himself to become. ## Chapter 3, The Weight of Truth. The call came at exactly 10:01 a.m., interrupting the peaceful domestic symphony of Yasmin washing breakfast dishes while Leo played with his toy cars on the kitchen floor. The jarring ring of the landline cut through the morning air like a blade, and Yasmin felt her stomach clench with inexplicable dread even before she answered. "Mrs. Martinez? This is Dr. Sarah Chun from Phoenix General Hospital." The voice on the other end was professionally compassionate, but couldn't entirely mask the weight of the news she was about to deliver. "I'm calling about an accident involving your vehicle and your mother-in-law, Mrs. Ephigenia Martinez." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Yasmin gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles white against the receiver. "An accident? What kind of accident? Is she hurt?" There was a pause, the kind of silence that stretches eternal when someone is trying to find words for the unspeakable. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm very sorry to have to tell you this, but Mrs. Ephigenia was killed in a single-vehicle accident on Highway 87 this morning. The car appears to have lost its brakes while going around Devil's Curve. She went over the embankment." The phone slipped from Yasmin's numb fingers, clattering to the floor as she sank into the nearest chair. Leo looked up from his cars, his innocent face clouding with concern as he watched his mother's world collapse around her. "Mommy, what's wrong?" But Yasmin couldn't answer. Her mind was reeling, trying to process the impossible. Mrs. Ephigenia, who'd been drinking coffee in this very kitchen just hours ago, was gone. The woman who'd welcomed Yasmin into the Martinez family with open arms, who'd taught her to make Elias's favorite mole, and who'd braided Leo's hair when he was a toddler, was dead. With shaking hands, Yasmin retrieved the phone and called Elias at work. He answered on the 5th ring, his voice carrying the impatient edge it had developed over the past year. "What is it, Yasmin? I'm in the middle of something important." "Your mother," she whispered, the words feeling like broken glass in her throat. "There's been an accident. She's gone, Elias." The silence that followed was different from the doctor's professional pause. This was the silence of a man whose world had just shifted in ways he could never have anticipated. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow, drained of all the arrogance that had characterized it moments before. "What do you mean, an accident? What happened?" "She borrowed my car to go see that healer in San Mateo. The brakes failed on Devil's Curve. She went over the embankment." Yasmin's voice cracked on the last words, the full reality of what had happened beginning to sink in. Elias hung up without another word, leaving Yasmin staring at the dead phone in her hand. At his office, he sat motionless in his chair, cold sweat beating on his forehead as the magnitude of his mistake crashed over him like a tsunami. He'd planned the perfect murder, and he'd succeeded, but he'd killed the wrong person. He'd killed his own mother. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. Grief warred with guilt, shock battled with a growing sense of cosmic justice. When Elias finally arrived at the morgue, Yasmin was already there, her face streaked with tears as she stood beside a sheet-covered form on a metal table. "She looks peaceful," Yasmin said softly, not looking up as Elias approached. "Like she's just sleeping." But Elias could see what Yasmin couldn't, or perhaps what she chose not to see. The subtle signs of trauma, the way his mother's body lay too still beneath the white sheet, the knowledge that her final moments had been filled with terror and confusion as her son's sabotage sent her plummeting toward death. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice so low that Yasmin couldn't hear. "It wasn't supposed to be you. It was never supposed to be you." The funeral arrangements passed in a haze of condolences and casseroles, of relatives traveling from distant cities and neighbors offering help with household tasks. Yasmin threw herself into the role of grieving daughter-in-law, coordinating the wake, selecting flowers, and ensuring that Mrs. Ephigenia received the send-off she deserved. But even in the midst of her grief, something nagged at the back of Yasmin's mind. The brake failure seemed too coincidental, too perfectly timed. Mrs. Ephigenia had been driving for 50 years without incident, and Yasmin had just had the car serviced 3 weeks ago. Victor, Elias's younger brother who worked as a mechanic, had given it a clean bill of health. On impulse, the night before the burial, Yasmin slipped out to the garage where the wrecked Honda sat like a metallic corpse. In the dim light from the overhead bulb, she examined the brake lines as best she could with her limited knowledge of automotive systems. What she saw made her blood run cold. The brake line hadn't worn through from age or use. It had been cut, cleanly, deliberately, with surgical precision. This wasn't mechanical failure. This was murder. But who would want to hurt Mrs. Ephigenia? The woman had no enemies, no debts, no secrets that would warrant such extreme action. Unless the intended victim hadn't been Mrs. Ephigenia at all. As the terrible truth began to crystallize in Yasmin's mind, she felt something die inside her, not just her marriage, but her faith in the fundamental goodness of the world. The man she'd shared a bed with for 12 years, the father of her child, had tried to murder her. And in the cruel arithmetic of fate, his mother had paid the price instead. Chapter 4, The Unraveling. The week following Mrs. Ephigenia's funeral passed like a fever dream, each day blending into the next in a haze of grief, suspicion, and carefully maintained normalcy. Yasmin moved through her daily routines like an actress playing a role she no longer understood, smiling at the right moments, saying the expected things, all while her mind churned with the terrible knowledge of what she'd discovered in the garage. Elias had returned to work immediately after the burial, claiming that staying busy would help him process his grief. But Yasmin could see the truth in the tremor of his hands when he thought no one was looking, in the way he started at unexpected sounds, in the bottles of whiskey that appeared and disappeared from their liquor cabinet with increasing frequency. "You're not eating," she observed one evening as they sat at the dinner table, the silence between them heavy as lead. Leo was upstairs doing homework, leaving them alone with their secrets and lies. Elias looked up from the plate he'd been pushing food around for the past 20 minutes. "I keep thinking about her," he said, and for a moment his voice carried genuine anguish. About how scared she must have been. It was the first honest thing he'd said to her in months, and despite everything, Yasmin felt a flicker of the old sympathy she'd once felt for this man. But then she remembered the cut brake line, the precision of the sabotage, and her heart hardened again. "The brake failure," she said carefully, watching his face. "It seems strange, doesn't it? The car was just serviced." Elias's fork clattered against his plate. "Old cars fail, Yasmin. You've said so yourself. But Victor checked everything. He's very thorough." At the mention of his brother's name, something flickered in Elias's eyes. Fear, perhaps, or calculation. "Victor makes mistakes like everyone else." Yasmin set down her own fork, her appetite completely gone. "I had him look at the wreckage today." The color drained from Elias's face so quickly that for a moment, Yasmin thought he might faint. "You did what?" "The brake line was cut, Elias. Deliberately. Cleanly. This wasn't an accident, it was murder." The words hung between them like a sword suspended by a thread. Elias's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his mind clearly racing to find an explanation, a defense, anything that might deflect the terrible logic of what his wife was suggesting. That's impossible, he finally managed. Who would want to hurt my mother? Yasmin leaned forward, her eyes boring into his. Maybe the intended victim wasn't your mother. It was then that Elias's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled. The mask of grief and shock fell away, replaced by something far more dangerous. The cornered look of a predator who suddenly realizes he's become the prey. What are you saying? He asked, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm saying that someone cut the brakes on my car, expecting me to drive it. But your mother borrowed it instead, and she died for someone else's sins. Elias stood up so quickly that his chair tipped backward, crashing to the floor with a sound that brought Leo running downstairs. Daddy, what happened? Nothing, Mijo, Yasmin said quickly, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. Daddy just knocked over his chair. Go back to your homework. But Leo lingered in the doorway, his 8-year-old instincts picking up on the tension that crackled between his parents like electricity. Are you fighting? No, baby. We're just talking. Go on upstairs. I'll be up to check on you in a few minutes. After Leo reluctantly disappeared up the stairs, Yasmin turned back to her husband. Elias had righted his chair but remained standing, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I need to know, Elias. I need to hear you say it. For a long moment he stared at her, and she could see the war raging behind his eyes. Part of him seemed to want to confess, to unburden himself of the terrible weight of what he'd done. But the larger part, the part that had planned murder with such cold precision, was already calculating his next move. I don't know what you want me to say, he said finally. My mother is dead because of mechanical failure. End of story. But it wasn't the end of the story. It was barely the beginning. That night, after Elias had drunk himself into a stupor on the living room couch, Yasmin sat in the darkness of their bedroom, her laptop open on the comforter beside her. She'd been reviewing the security footage from their home system, cameras that Elias had installed months ago for their protection. The irony was almost laughable. Fast-forwarding through hours of empty frames, she finally found what she was looking for. The timestamp read 4:23 a.m. on the morning of the accident. On the grainy black and white footage, she could see 2 figures moving stealthily around her car. Even in the poor resolution, she recognized her husband's distinctive silhouette, the way he favored his left shoulder from an old football injury. But he wasn't alone. The second figure was smaller, more delicate, with long hair that caught the moonlight. As Yasmin watched, the woman knelt beside Elias as he worked beneath the car, their heads close together in intimate conversation. Though the audio quality was poor, she could make out fragments of their discussion. When she has the accident, our lives will be all set. What if she takes the boy? She won't even know what's happening. When the sabotage was complete, the woman stood and embraced Elias with the familiarity of lovers. In the moment before they separated, she turned toward the camera, and Yasmin got a clear look at her face. Samara Delgado, the night shift nurse from Phoenix General, where Mrs. Ephigenia had been taken after the accident. The woman who'd expressed such sincere condolences, who'd held Yasmin's hand while she cried, who'd whispered comfort about how quickly Mrs. Ephigenia's passing had been. The woman who'd helped murder her. ## Chapter 5, The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. The revelation of Samara's involvement hit Yasmin like a physical blow, but rather than crumbling under the weight of betrayal, she felt something crystallize inside her. A cold, hard resolve that surprised her with its intensity. For 12 years, she'd been Elias's faithful wife, the woman who made his favorite meals, who smoothed over his rough edges at social gatherings, who'd sublimated her own dreams to support his ambitions. But that woman was gone, murdered as surely as Mrs. Ephigenia had been. In her place stood someone new, someone who understood that the world wasn't divided between good people and evil people, but between those who would fight for what mattered and those who would prey on the innocent. Mrs. Ephigenia's death had been a tragedy, but it would not be meaningless. Not if Yasmin had anything to say about it. The next morning, while Elias nursed a hangover and Leo played in the backyard, Yasmin made 2 phone calls that would set in motion the destruction of everything her husband had worked to build. The first call was to Victor Martinez, Elias's younger brother, and the most honest man she'd ever known. Victor had always been the black sheep of the Martinez family. Too ethical for his own good, according to his relatives, too willing to speak uncomfortable truths that others preferred to ignore. While Elias had climbed the corporate ladder through a combination of charm, ambition, and strategic corner-cutting, Victor had built his reputation one honest transaction at a time. Yasmin, Victor's voice carried surprise and concern. How are you holding up, Hermana? The endearment, sister, brought tears to her eyes, but she blinked them back. She needed to be strong now, stronger than she'd ever been in her life. I need your help, Victor. And I need you to promise me that what I'm about to tell you stays between us until I say otherwise. There was a pause, and when Victor spoke again, his voice was serious. What's going on? The brake failure that killed your mother, it wasn't an accident. She heard his sharp intake of breath. What are you saying? I'm saying someone cut the brake lines on my car. Someone who expected me to be driving it that morning. The silence stretched long enough that Yasmin began to wonder if the call had been dropped. Finally, Victor spoke, his voice thick with disbelief and growing anger. Dios mío. Are you sure? I've seen the evidence. I have security footage of the sabotage. Victor, I know who did it. Who? The name stuck in her throat like a splinter. Speaking it aloud would make it real in a way that even the video evidence hadn't. Elias. And he had help. A woman named Samara Delgado. The sound Victor made was somewhere between a growl and a sob. That bastard. That son of a bitch killed our mother. Victor, I need you to listen to me. I'm going to bring them down, but I need to do it the right way. I need evidence that will stand up in court, not just grainy security footage that might be inadmissible. What do you need me to do? Help me find proof. And if things go bad, be ready to get Leo somewhere safe. Her second phone call was to Teresa Vega, a woman she'd known since college who now worked as an independent journalist specializing in local corruption and crime stories. Teresa had built a following through her YouTube channel and podcast, where she investigated cases that the mainstream media often overlooked: domestic violence situations that turned deadly, police misconduct, corporate malfeasance that hurt ordinary families. Yasmin Martinez, Teresa said when she answered, her voice warm with genuine affection. I heard about Mrs. Ephigenia. I'm so sorry for your loss. Thank you. Teresa, I need to ask you something, and I need you to keep an open mind. Of course. What's going on? What would you say if I told you that Mrs. Ephigenia's death wasn't an accident? That it was murder, and I have proof? Teresa's journalistic instincts immediately kicked in. I'd say you need to tell me everything, and I need to see your evidence. When can we meet? They arranged to meet that afternoon at a coffee shop in Tempe, far enough from Phoenix that they were unlikely to encounter anyone who knew Elias or his associates. Yasmin spent the morning copying the security footage to multiple USB drives and gathering every piece of evidence she could think of. Maintenance records for the car, insurance documents, even photos of the cut brake lines that Victor had taken at her request. As she prepared for the meeting that would set her plan in motion, Yasmin found herself thinking about Mrs. Ephigenia, about the woman who'd died because she'd had the misfortune to be kind to her daughter-in-law on the wrong morning. In Mexican culture, there was a concept called justicia, justice that went deeper than legal verdicts, justice that demanded not just punishment for the guilty, but restoration for the community they'd harmed. Mrs. Ephigenia would have her justice, even if it destroyed everything else in the process. The meeting with Teresa lasted 3 hours. By the time they parted ways, Teresa's eyes were bright with the fervor that came when a true journalist scented a story that could make a real difference. She promised to begin her investigation immediately, starting with background checks on both Elias and Samara to see if there were any financial motives or insurance policies that might explain their actions. But Yasmin's most dangerous gambit was yet to come. That evening, she did something that would have seemed impossible just weeks before. She began to seduce her would-be murderer. ## Chapter 6, The Seduction of Truth. That evening, Yasmin Martinez stood before her bedroom mirror and saw a stranger looking back at her. Gone was the trusting wife who'd spent 12 years believing in her husband's fundamental goodness. In her place was a woman who understood that sometimes the only way to find justice was to become something you'd never wanted to be. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, the blue wrap dress that Elias had always said made her look like a real woman, whatever that meant. She'd applied makeup with the skill of someone who'd learned to highlight her best features while concealing her worst fears, and she'd styled her hair in the loose waves that he'd found irresistible when they were dating. Looking at herself in the mirror, she felt like an actress preparing for the most important role of her career. But this wasn't a performance, it was war, and she was about to walk onto a battlefield where the wrong word or gesture could cost her everything. Leo was spending the night at her sister's house, an arrangement that had required careful orchestration. She'd told Elias that she needed some time to process her grief without worrying about putting on a brave face for their son. It was true enough, though her real intention was far darker. Downstairs, she prepared Elias's favorite meal with the same meticulous care that she'd once brought to their anniversary dinners. Mole poblano, a complex sauce that required hours of preparation and 30 different ingredients, served over tender chicken with perfect rice and fresh tortillas from the Mexican bakery downtown. She opened a bottle of the expensive red wine they'd been saving for a special occasion, though she doubted either of them would remember this evening fondly. When Elias arrived home from work, he stopped short in the doorway, his face cycling through confusion, suspicion, and despite everything, a flicker of the old desire. "What's all this?" he asked, but his tone was wary rather than appreciative. "I've been thinking," Yasmin said, approaching him with a smile that felt like broken glass in her mouth. "We've both been so consumed with grief and anger that we've forgotten what we mean to each other. Your mother wouldn't want us to destroy our marriage over this tragedy." She could see the calculations running behind his eyes, the way he was trying to determine if this was some kind of trap. But Elias had always been a man ruled by his appetites, and the combination of his favorite meal, expensive wine, and his wife's apparent submission to his needs was too tempting to resist. "Where's Leo?" he asked as he hung up his jacket. "At Maria's for the night. I thought we could use some time alone." Over dinner, Yasmin played her part perfectly. She listened to his complaints about work with apparent interest, laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny, and gradually steered the conversation toward their future together. She talked about the insurance money from his mother's death, about how they could use it to take the vacation they'd been planning for years, about the ways that tragedy sometimes brought couples closer together. The wine flowed freely, and with each glass, Elias's guard dropped a little further. By the time they moved to the living room, he was more relaxed than she'd seen him in months, leaning back on the couch with the satisfied expression of a man who believed he'd successfully weathered the worst storm of his life. "I love you, Yasmin," he said, reaching for her hand. "I know things have been difficult lately, but we're going to get through this." "I know," she replied, settling beside him on the couch and curling up against his side. Hidden in the palm of her hand was a small digital recorder, no bigger than a thumb drive, that she'd purchased that afternoon with cash. "Sometimes I think about how different things could have been if your mother hadn't borrowed my car that day." Elias tensed slightly, but the wine and her apparent submission had lowered his defenses enough that he didn't pull away. "Don't think about that," he said, his arm tightening around her. "What's done is done." "But I do think about it," Yasmin pressed gently, her voice soft with manufactured vulnerability. "I think about how that morning was supposed to go differently. How if she hadn't asked to borrow the car?" The silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft jazz music she'd put on earlier and the distant sound of traffic outside their window. Elias was struggling, she could tell, fighting between the need to maintain his facade and the growing pressure of carrying such a devastating secret alone. "Everything happens for a reason," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "Does it?" Yasmin shifted slightly, looking up at him with eyes that she hoped conveyed trust rather than the calculating intelligence that was really driving her actions. "Sometimes I wonder if the universe was trying to protect me from something. As if your mother, as if she somehow knew." The words hit their mark. Elias flinched as if she'd struck him, and for a moment his careful mask slipped entirely. In his eyes, she saw guilt so profound it was almost tangible, a weight that had been crushing him since the moment he'd learned of his mother's death. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice was thick with emotion. "Maybe I don't," Yasmin agreed, snuggling closer to him. "But I keep thinking about that morning, about how perfect everything was supposed to be. I was going to yoga, Leo was at school, you were at work. Everything in its place, everything predictable." She felt him shudder, and she knew she was close to breaking through whatever defenses he had left. The wine, the intimate setting, the careful way she was probing at his guilt. It was all designed to create the perfect conditions for a confession. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," Elias whispered, so quietly she almost missed it. "What wasn't supposed to happen?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Then, as if a dam had finally burst, the words came pouring out. "None of it. The accident, my mother, any of it. It was supposed to be clean, supposed to be quick. You wouldn't have suffered. You wouldn't even have known what was happening." His voice broke on the last words, and Yasmin felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. "Elias," she said carefully, "what are you talking about?" But he was beyond caring about caution now, the wine and guilt combining to strip away his final reserves of self-control. "I cut the brakes. On your car. That morning before dawn. It was supposed to be you on Devil's Curve, not her. Never her. The confession hung in the air between them like a physical thing, and for a moment, Yasmin felt the full weight of what she'd suspected crashing down on her. Hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that even the video evidence hadn't. Why? She whispered, and despite everything, the question came from a place of genuine pain. This man had been her husband, the father of her child, her partner in building a life together. Understanding his betrayal felt essential, even if it was devastating. The money, he said simply. Your inheritance, the life insurance, the house. And Samara. She made me feel alive again in a way you hadn't in years. We could have had everything, a fresh start, financial security, freedom. And Leo? Elias was quiet for so long that Yasmin began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow with shame. We would have taken care of him. He would have been fine. Children are resilient. The casual way he dismissed their son's potential trauma, losing his mother to a manufactured accident, revealed the depth of Elias's selfishness more clearly than anything else he could have said. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of weakness. It was the calculated elimination of an obstacle by a man who saw other people as expendable. But your mother borrowed the car instead, Yasmin said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. My mother paid the price for my sins, he replied, and for the first time his voice carried genuine anguish. She died because I wanted you dead. Because I was too much of a coward to just ask for a divorce, because I was too greedy to split our assets fairly. The recorder in Yasmin's palm captured every word, every admission, every detail of the conspiracy that had cost Mrs. Ephigenia her life. But even as she gathered the evidence she needed to destroy him, she felt a profound sadness for the man he'd once been. Or perhaps the man she'd believed him to be. What happens now? She asked. Elias pulled back to look at her, his eyes red-rimmed with unshed tears. Now we live with what happened. We take the insurance money, and we try to build something good from this tragedy. We honor my mother's memory by being better people. The sheer audacity of it took her breath away. Even now, even after confessing to attempted murder, he thought he could manipulate her into complicity. He believed that her love for him, or her fear of scandal, or her desire to protect Leo would keep her silent. He was wrong. I think you should get some sleep, Yasmin said gently, easing away from him. You've had a lot to drink, and tomorrow is going to be a difficult day. Elias nodded, seemingly relieved that she wasn't pressing him for more details. You're right. This conversation, maybe we shouldn't talk about it again. Some things are better left buried. Some things, Yasmin agreed. But not all things. ## Chapter 7. The Reckoning Begins. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, as if the sky itself was mourning the innocence that had died along with Mrs. Ephigenia Martinez. Yasmin woke before her alarm, the digital recorder still clutched in her hand, its tiny memory chip now containing the key to her husband's destruction. Elias slept deeply beside her, the sleep of a man who believed he'd successfully unburdened himself without consequences. His face, relaxed in sleep, looked younger somehow, more like the college student she'd fallen in love with 2 decades ago. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember what it had felt like to believe in their future together, to plan for children and careers and growing old side by side. That woman was gone now, as thoroughly dead as Mrs. Ephigenia. In her place was someone harder, more calculating, but also more alive than she'd been in years. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been liberating in ways she was only beginning to understand. Moving carefully to avoid waking him, Yasmin slipped out of bed and padded to the kitchen, where she made coffee with the same mechanical precision she'd brought to every morning routine for 12 years. But today was different. Today, she was going to begin dismantling the life she'd built with methodical thoroughness. Her first call was to Teresa Vega. Yasmin? It's barely 7 a.m. Are you okay? I have it, Yasmin said without preamble. I have his confession. Everything, the cut-break lines, the conspiracy with Samara, even his admission that the intended victim was me, not his mother. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Yasmin began to worry the connection had dropped. Then Teresa spoke, her voice tight with professional excitement and personal outrage. Jesus Christ. You actually got him to confess? How? I played the grieving wife who just wanted to understand what happened. Wine helped. Guilt helped more. Yasmin, this is huge. This isn't just attempted murder anymore. This is a conspiracy that resulted in the death of an innocent woman. With a full confession on tape, the district attorney will have to prosecute. I want you to have the story first, Yasmin said. Before I go to the police, before the lawyers get involved, I want the truth out there. I want people to know what really happened to Mrs. Iphigenia, and I want them to understand that domestic violence doesn't always look like black eyes and broken bones. They arranged to meet that afternoon, but first, Yasmin had other calls to make. She contacted her sister Maria, explaining that she needed Leo to stay there for a few more days. She called Victor and asked him to meet her at his shop after lunch. And finally, in a move that required more courage than she'd known she possessed, she called Samara Delgado. Yasmin. Samara's voice carried surprise and what might have been guilt. How are you holding up? I know this must be such a difficult time. The sheer audacity of the concern in the other woman's voice nearly broke Yasmin's composure. This was the woman who'd knelt beside her husband as he sabotaged her car, who'd helped plan her murder, who'd held her hand at the hospital while Mrs. Iphigenia's body lay cooling on a metal table. I need to see you, Yasmin said, working to keep her voice steady. Today, if possible. There are some things about Mrs. Iphigenia's accident that I need to understand. There was a pause, and when Samara spoke again, her voice was more cautious. What kind of things? The kind that are better discussed in person. Can you meet me at the coffee shop on Central, near the hospital? Around 2. After some hesitation, Samara agreed. Yasmin suspected that the other woman's curiosity would outweigh her caution. She'd want to know how much Yasmin knew, whether her carefully constructed facade was still intact. The meeting with Teresa went better than Yasmin had dared hope. The journalist listened to the entire recorded confession without interruption, her face growing harder with each admission of guilt. When it was over, she sat back in her chair and whistled softly. This is going to destroy him, she said. His career, his reputation, his freedom, everything. Are you prepared for that? For the media attention, the trial, the way this is going to turn your life upside down. My life was already turned upside down the moment I realized my husband wanted me dead, Yasmin replied. At least now I get to control the narrative. Teresa nodded slowly. When do you want me to publish? Give me 24 hours. I want to confront Samara first, see if I can get her to flip on him. If she's willing to testify, the case becomes airtight. And if she's not, then she goes down with him. The coffee shop was nearly empty when Yasmin arrived, the afternoon lull between lunch and dinner leaving most tables vacant. She chose a corner booth with clear sight lines to all entrances, positioning herself with her back to the wall. Precautions that would have seemed paranoid just weeks ago, but now felt like basic survival instincts. Samara arrived 10 minutes late, her nurse's scrubs replaced by jeans and a sweater that made her look younger, more vulnerable. But Yasmin wasn't fooled by appearances anymore. She'd learned that monsters rarely announce themselves with fangs and claws. Thank you for meeting me, Yasmin said as Samara slid into the opposite seat. I know this must be awkward, given everything that's happened. Not awkward, Samara replied carefully. But I have to admit I'm curious about what you wanted to discuss. Yasmin studied the other woman's face, noting the way she avoided direct eye contact, the slight tremor in her hands as she reached for her coffee cup. Fear, guilt, and calculation warred in her expression, creating a mask that was almost convincing. I've been thinking a lot about that night, Yasmin said. The night Mrs. Iphigenia died. About the choices people make, the secrets they keep, the prices they're willing to pay for what they want. Something flickered in Samara's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or the first stirrings of panic. I'm not sure what you mean. I think you do. Yasmin leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I know about you and Elias. I know about the plan to kill me. I know about the cut-break lines and the insurance money and the new life you thought you'd build on my grave. The color drained from Samara's face so quickly that Yasmin thought she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish pulled from water, and her hands began to shake visibly. I don't know what you think you know, but I have video footage of you and my husband sabotaging my car, Yasmin interrupted. I have his full confession, recorded last night while he was drunk and feeling guilty about his mother's death. I have bank records showing unusual deposits into your account over the past 6 months. I have everything, Samara. The lie about bank records came easily, and the effect was immediate. Samara's carefully constructed facade crumbled entirely, replaced by the panicked expression of someone who'd just realized their world was about to collapse. You have to understand, she said desperately. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Your mother-in-law was never supposed to be hurt. It was supposed to be quick, clean. You wouldn't have suffered. The way you planned to murder me is supposed to make me feel better? No, that's not. God, I'm so sorry. You have to believe me. I never wanted anyone to die. Elias said it would look like an accident, that no one would ever know. I was so lonely and he made me feel special, and I thought. You thought what? That you could kill me and take my place? That you could raise my son and spend my money and live in my house like some kind of twisted fairy tale. Tears were streaming down Samara's face now, her composure completely shattered. I know how it sounds. I know there's no excuse for what we did. But I was in love with him, and he promised me we'd be together, and I was so tired of being alone all the time. Despite everything, the betrayal, the conspiracy, the death of an innocent woman, Yasmin felt a flicker of pity for the broken creature sitting across from her. Samara wasn't evil in the way that Elias was. She was weak, desperate, and foolishly naive. She'd allowed herself to be manipulated by a man who saw her as nothing more than an accomplice to murder. Here's what's going to happen, Yasmin said, her voice steady and implacable. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to the police with everything I have. The video, the confession, all of it. You have two choices. You can cooperate, testify against Elias, and probably get a reduced sentence for your cooperation. Or you can go down with him and spend the next 30 years in prison. But if you testify, you might have a chance at some kind of life when you get out. If you don't, you'll die in prison, and Mrs. Ephigenia's death will have been for nothing. Samara buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I can't go to prison. I can't. I won't survive it. You should have thought of that before you helped murder an innocent woman. The words were harsh, but Yasmin felt no sympathy. Mrs. Ephigenia Martinez had been a kind, generous woman who died because she'd made the mistake of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Her death demanded justice, and if that justice required breaking the woman who'd helped orchestrate it, so be it. What do you want me to do? Samara whispered. I want you to tell the truth. All of it. I want you to help me make sure that Elias pays for what he's done. And I want you to understand that this is the only chance you're going to get to make this right. By the time they parted ways, Samara had agreed to cooperate. She would meet with Teresa and provide her own recorded statement. She would turn over any evidence she had, emails, text messages, anything that documented the conspiracy. And when the time came, she would testify against the man she'd thought she loved. That evening, Yasmin returned home to find Elias waiting for her in the kitchen, his face pale and his hands shaking. On the table before him was a copy of the local newspaper, and above the fold was a headline that made her blood run cold. Local woman claims husband plotted her murder. Teresa had moved faster than expected. We need to talk, Elias said, his voice deadly quiet. Yes, Yasmin replied, meeting his eyes without flinching. We do. ## Chapter 8. The confession goes public. The story broke like a wildfire across social media, spreading from Teresa's YouTube channel to Twitter, Facebook, and local news websites within hours. The headline was stark and uncompromising. Phoenix mother reveals husband's murder plot led to mother-in-law's death. Below it was Yasmin's photo, a recent picture from Leo's school function where she looked like any other suburban mother, which made the story all the more shocking. But it was the audio that truly captured the public's imagination. Teresa had excerpted the most damning portions of Elias's confession, his own voice condemning him with words that no amount of legal maneuvering could explain away. I cut the brakes. On your car. That morning before dawn. It was supposed to be you on Devil's Curve, not her. Never her. Within 6 hours, the video had 100,000 views. Within 12, it had reached 500,000. By the following morning, major news outlets were picking up the story, and Elias Martinez found himself at the center of a media firestorm that would destroy everything he'd worked to build. The confrontation between husband and wife that evening was unlike anything that had come before. Gone was any pretense of normalcy, any attempt to maintain the facade of their marriage. They faced each other across their kitchen table like opposing generals surveying a battlefield, each knowing that only one of them would emerge from this conflict intact. You recorded me, Elias said, his voice flat with accusation. You got me drunk, and you recorded our private conversation. You tried to murder me, Yasmin replied with equal directness. You killed your own mother instead. I think that trumps any concerns about privacy. Elias's hands clenched into fists on the table, and for a moment, Yasmin wondered if he might actually strike her. The man she'd married would never have raised a hand to her, but that man was gone, if he'd ever existed at all. In his place sat someone she was only now beginning to truly see. "You don't understand what you've done," he said, his voice rising. "This will destroy both of us. Leo will grow up knowing his father is in prison. His mother is the woman who put him there. You think that's better than keeping quiet?" "I think the truth is always better than lies," Yasmin shot back. "And I think Leo deserves to know that his mother fought back instead of rolling over and playing victim." "Fought back?" Elias stood up so quickly his chair tipped backward, hitting the floor with a crash that echoed through the house. "You call destroying our family fighting back? You call ruining our son's life fighting back? I call it justice for your mother. I call it making sure no other woman dies because you're too selfish to ask for a divorce." The word divorce seemed to hit him like a physical blow. His face went pale, then flushed red with rage. "You want a divorce? Fine. But you won't get anything. Not the house, not my pension, not a cent of support for Leo. I'll make sure you end up with nothing." Yasmin stood as well, matching his anger with cold determination. "I don't want your money, Elias. I want you to pay for what you did to Mrs. Ephigenia. I want Samara to pay. And I want every woman who's being stalked or threatened or abused to see that fighting back is possible." "Samara?" Something flickered in his eyes, fear perhaps or calculation. "What does Samara have to do with this?" "She's going to testify against you. She's going to tell the world exactly how you planned my murder, how you convinced her to help, how you both celebrated while your mother's body was still warm." The information hit its mark. Elias staggered backward as if she'd struck him, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and finally panic. "She wouldn't do that. She loves me. She loves herself more." When faced with 30 years in prison or a reduced sentence for cooperation, love doesn't count for much. It was then that Elias truly began to understand the scope of what was happening to him. The video was public, the confession was in the hands of law enforcement, and his co-conspirator was preparing to testify against him. His carefully constructed life was crumbling around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'll fight this. I'll hire the best lawyers, You'll go to prison," Yasmin interrupted. "And when Leo is old enough to understand what happened, I'll make sure he knows that his father was a man who tried to kill his mother and ended up murdering his grandmother instead." That night, Elias didn't come home. Yasmin found out later that he'd checked into a motel on the outskirts of town, probably hoping to avoid the media attention that was beginning to swirl around their neighborhood. Reporters had already started calling the house, and she'd disconnected the landline after the 15th attempt to get her to comment on the story. But if Elias thought he could hide from the consequences of his actions, he was quickly proven wrong. The next morning brought news that would make his situation immeasurably worse. Teresa called just after sunrise, her voice tight with excitement and barely contained outrage. "Yasmin, you need to see the morning news. There's been a development." Yasmin turned on the television to find a breaking news banner scrolling across the bottom of the screen. "Phoenix police arrest 2 in murder conspiracy." The reporter's voice carried the weight of a story that was clearly bigger than anyone had initially realized. Samara Delgado, a registered nurse at Phoenix General Hospital, surrendered to police early this morning and provided a detailed confession regarding her role in the conspiracy to murder Yasmin Martinez. But perhaps more shocking is her claim that the plot was financed and orchestrated by prominent local businessman Roberto Laureano. The name hit Yasmin like a physical blow. Roberto Laureano was a pillar of the community, a widower who'd devoted his later years to philanthropy and civic improvement. He'd helped fund the community center where Leo took swimming lessons, had donated money to the local library, had been featured in the newspaper multiple times for his charitable work. According to Ms. Delgado's statement, the reporter continued, Mr. Laureano approached Elias Martinez 6 months ago with a proposal to eliminate his wife so that valuable property owned by the Martinez family could be acquired for a proposed development project. The conspiracy allegedly involved a payment of $50,000 to Mr. Martinez, with the promise of additional compensation after Mrs. Martinez's death. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. This wasn't just a husband who'd fallen out of love with his wife. This was a carefully orchestrated conspiracy involving money, property development, and the cold-blooded elimination of anyone who stood in the way of profit. Yasmin's phone rang almost immediately. It was Victor, his voice shaking with rage. "Did you see the news? That bastard Laureano was behind this whole thing. He wanted our family's land for some development project, so he paid Elias to kill you. Paid him like you were just another business expense to be written off. The family land Victor referenced was a 10-acre parcel on the outskirts of Phoenix that Yasmin had inherited from her father. It wasn't particularly valuable in her mind, mostly desert scrub with a small house that had been in her family for 3 generations. But to a developer, it represented prime real estate for a shopping center or housing development. "Elias sold me out for $50,000 and a piece of land," Yasmin said, the words feeling surreal even as she spoke them. "He was going to murder me for a development deal. And our mother died for it instead," Victor replied, his voice thick with grief and rage. "That innocent woman died so these bastards could build a strip mall." By noon, all 3 conspirators were in custody. Elias had been arrested at his motel, Samara had surrendered with her attorney, and Roberto Laureano had been taken into custody at his mansion in Scottsdale as FBI agents searched his home and offices for evidence of the conspiracy. The media coverage was unprecedented for a local story. The combination of attempted murder, a conspiracy involving a prominent businessman, and the tragic death of an innocent woman had captured public attention in a way that transcended typical crime reporting. Yasmin found herself at the center of a story that was being covered by national news outlets, with reporters camping outside her house, and her phone ringing constantly with interview requests. But perhaps the most important call came that evening, as she sat in Victor's cabin with Leo, both of them trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. "Mrs. Martinez? This is Detective Sarah Rodriguez with the Phoenix Police Department. I wanted to let you know that all 3 suspects have been formally charged. Mr. Martinez and Mr. Laureano are being held without bail on charges of conspiracy to commit murder and murder in the first degree. Ms. Delgado has been charged with conspiracy to commit murder, but will likely receive a reduced sentence in exchange for her cooperation." "Murder in the first degree?" Yasmin asked. "I thought that required premeditation. The extensive planning, the financial arrangement, the deliberate sabotage of your vehicle. It all adds up to premeditated murder, even though the intended victim wasn't the one who died. Your mother-in-law's death was a direct result of their conspiracy to kill you." As Yasmin hung up the phone, she felt a complex mixture of satisfaction, sadness, and exhaustion. Justice was being served, but it came at a price that seemed almost too high to bear. Mrs. Ephigenia was still dead, Leo's father was going to prison, and their family would never be the same. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps some things needed to be broken before they could be rebuilt into something better, something more honest, something that could survive in the harsh light of truth. #epilogue, Justice and Redemption. The trial of Elias Martinez, Roberto Laureano, and Samara Delgado became one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings in Phoenix's history. For 6 weeks, the courtroom was packed with reporters, family members, and citizens who'd followed the case from its shocking beginnings to its inevitable conclusion. Yasmin testified on the 3rd day, her voice clear and steady as she recounted the morning Mrs. Ephigenia had borrowed her car, the discovery of the sabotaged brake lines, and the recorded confession that had brought the entire conspiracy to light. She spoke about her mother-in-law with love and respect, painting a picture of a woman whose only crime had been kindness at the wrong moment. Samara's testimony was more difficult to watch. The woman who'd once seemed so confident and self-assured was now a broken shell, barely able to speak above a whisper as she detailed her role in the conspiracy. She spoke of loneliness, of feeling invisible in her own life, of being manipulated by a man who'd promised her love but delivered only destruction. "I know there's no excuse for what I did," she said through tears. "I know that my actions led to the death of an innocent woman. I can only hope that by telling the truth now, I can somehow honor her memory and maybe prevent other families from experiencing this kind of loss." But it was Roberto Laureano's testimony that truly revealed the depths of the conspiracy. The man who'd been celebrated for his philanthropy and civic engagement was exposed as someone who saw human lives as obstacles to profit. He'd approached Elias not out of any personal animosity toward Yasmin, but simply because she owned property he wanted and refused to sell. "Business is business," he said from the witness stand, showing no remorse even as the full scope of his callousness was revealed. Mrs. Martinez was standing in the way of a project that would have benefited the entire community. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made. The sentences, when they came, reflected the severity of the crimes. Elias received 35 years for first-degree murder and conspiracy. Roberto Laureano received 42 years, his sentence enhanced by his role as the architect of the conspiracy and his complete lack of remorse. Samara received 8 years, with the possibility of parole in 5 due to her cooperation and genuine expressions of regret. But for Yasmin, the real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in what came after. 6 months following the trial, she used the life insurance money from Mrs. Efigenia's death to establish the Efigenia Martinez Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting victims of domestic violence and helping women escape dangerous situations. The foundation operated safe houses, provided legal assistance, and offered counseling services to women who'd found themselves trapped in relationships that threatened their lives. Mrs. Efigenia died because she was kind to someone who needed help, Yasmin said at the foundation's opening ceremony, standing beneath a portrait of her mother-in-law that captured her gentle smile and wise eyes. The best way I can honor her memory is by making sure that kindness continues to exist in the world, and by helping other women find the strength to fight back when their lives are threatened. Leo, now 10 years old, had struggled with the revelation of his father's crimes, but he'd found solace in understanding that his mother had fought for justice rather than accepting victimhood. He often visited the foundation's offices after school, helping with small tasks and listening to the stories of women who'd found safety and hope after escaping dangerous relationships. "My mom saved my life too," he told a reporter during the foundation's first anniversary celebration. "She could have stayed quiet and let bad things keep happening, but she chose to be brave instead. Now other kids don't have to lose their moms because someone wants to hurt them." The story had a profound impact beyond Phoenix's city limits. Yasmin's book, The Sweetest Poison, a story of betrayal, loss, and finding justice, became a bestseller and inspired similar foundations in other cities. She spoke at conferences and universities, sharing her story and encouraging other women to recognize the warning signs of domestic violence and to understand that fighting back was always an option. One evening, 3 years after the trial, Yasmin received a letter with no return address. The handwriting was familiar, though she couldn't immediately place it. Inside was a single page, written in careful script. "Dear Yasmin, I saw your interview on the national news last week. I want you to know that I'm living in another state now, under a new name, trying to build something good from the wreckage of what I helped create. I work at a women's shelter here, and every day I see the faces of women who could have been you, who could have been me. I tell them your story when they're ready to hear it, how you refused to be a victim, how you turned tragedy into justice, how you proved that the truth is always stronger than lies. I don't ask for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that your courage changed my life as much as it changed the lives of the women you've helped through the foundation. Mrs. Efigenia's death wasn't meaningless. It became the seed of something beautiful and life-saving. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. S." That night, Yasmin sat in her backyard beneath the orange tree she'd planted in Mrs. Efigenia's memory, the letter in her hands and tears on her cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness, but of something more complex. A recognition that even the darkest betrayals could sometimes lead to light, that even the most devastating losses could become the foundation for something meaningful and lasting. Leo emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate, settling beside his mother in comfortable silence. At 13, he'd grown into a thoughtful, empathetic young man who understood the weight of the story that had shaped his childhood but wasn't defined by it. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked, noticing the letter in her hands. "I'm more than okay," Yasmin replied, putting her arm around her son. "I'm grateful." "For what?" She looked up at the stars, thinking about Mrs. Efigenia, about the foundation that bore her name, about the hundreds of women who'd found safety and hope through its programs. For the chance to turn something terrible into something good. For the opportunity to make sure your grandmother's death meant something. For the privilege of helping other people find their strength. As they sat together under the vast Arizona sky, Yasmin reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The betrayal had been devastating, the loss almost unbearable, but from that darkness had emerged a purpose she could never have imagined. She'd lost a husband but found her true calling. She'd lost the illusion of safety but gained real strength. She'd lost the comfortable lie of her marriage, but found the uncomfortable truth of her own power. Mrs. Efigenia's death had not been in vain. Every woman who walked through the foundation's doors, every life that was saved, every child who grew up in safety rather than fear. They were all part of her legacy, all proof that love and justice could triumph over greed and violence. The sweetest poison, Yasmin had learned, wasn't the false love that masked murderous intent. It was the bitter medicine of truth that, once swallowed, could cure a life of its illusions and reveal the strength that had always been waiting beneath the surface. In the distance, a coyote called to the moon, its voice carried on the desert wind like a prayer for all the lost and lonely souls seeking their way home. But in the Martinez backyard, under the protective branches of Mrs. Ephigenia's orange tree, there was peace. There was healing. There was the quiet satisfaction of justice served and love honored. "What are you thinking about?" Leo asked, following his mother's gaze up to the stars. "I'm thinking about second chances," Yasmin said softly. "About how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can become the thing that saves you. Your grandmother's death was a tragedy, but it also revealed a truth that might never have come to light otherwise. And from that truth, we've been able to help so many other people." "Do you think she knows?" Leo asked. "About the foundation, about all the women you've helped." Yasmin smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the Arizona night air. "I think she knows. I think she's proud. And I think she understands that her death wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of something much bigger and more beautiful than any of us could have imagined." As if in response to her words, a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the orange tree, carrying the sweet scent of blossoms that had bloomed despite the desert's harsh conditions. It was a reminder that life finds a way to flourish even in the most unlikely circumstances, that beauty can emerge from devastation, and that love, true love, never really dies. It simply transforms into something eternal, something that echoes through the lives of everyone it touches, creating ripples of healing and hope that extend far beyond what any one person could achieve alone. Mrs. Ephigenia Martinez had lived a quiet life and died a tragic death. But her legacy would endure in every woman who found the courage to leave an abusive relationship, in every child who grew up safe from violence, in every person who chose truth over comfortable lies. The sweetest poison had become the most powerful antidote. And in the end, love had won after all. Author's note asterisk. This story explores themes of domestic violence, betrayal, and the complex process of seeking justice while dealing with grief and trauma. While the characters and events are fictional, the issues they face are all too real for many families around the world. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please know that help is available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline 1-800-799-7233 provides confidential support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You are not alone, and there are people who want to help you find safety and healing. Remember that true love never involves threats, manipulation, or violence. Everyone deserves to feel safe in their relationships and their homes. And while seeking justice for wrongs committed against us can be difficult and painful, it is often the only path to real healing and the prevention of future harm. The Yasmin Martinez story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, we have choices. We can choose courage over fear, truth over lies, action over passivity. And sometimes those choices not only transform our own lives but create ripples of positive change that extend far beyond what we could have imagined. May we all find the strength to stand up for what is right, to protect the vulnerable, and to honor the memory of those we've lost by living lives of purpose, compassion, and unwavering commitment to justice.